Morgue workers, what is the weirdest cause of death you have been able to diagnose? Story 1. I'm a physician assistant specializing in pathology. One of my favorites was actually the first case I saw rotating at a medical examiner office during grad school. This guy got depressed over whatever and decided to fill a backpack with bricks and jump off a bridge. He did this in the late fall and, obviously, sank to the bottom. What he did not account for was that, over time, his body would continue to fill with gas due to the bacteria slowly eating away at his insides, to the point that, even with a backpack full of bricks, he would still float to the top. He finally resurfaced in early June. The man was unrecognizable and severely bloated, smelled awful. I've got a ton of stories, but I'm at work now. Maybe I'll post more later if anyone is interested enough and this post doesn't get buried. Edit. Due to some interest, here are a few more stories I can think of. One per paragraph from here on. During a heat wave, a body was found that was a few months gone. Just about all the internal organs were liquefied, and the heart was all brown and mushy. While I was dissecting the coronary arteries, numerous maggots emerged from the arteries and out of the heart. I was moderately disgusted, but the attending got all excited and said, "No, this is great evidence." Apparently, maggots cannot eat up the arterial plaques or clots that would have caused a heart attack, so we were able to eliminate that from the differential. I don't think the cause of death was ever fully determined, but I learned something that day. An 8-year-old child was found at a train yard with burns all over him. Apparently, he snuck away from a block party to go climb and play on the trains, and his friend dared him to touch the cables, indicated with a large, high-voltage do not touch sign. He was found several yards from the train, and it appeared he had been thrown that length, not dragged or moved. So when you see someone get electrocuted in a movie, the force of it really can throw a person quite a distance, so that's not just Hollywood nonsense. As follow-up, the child had a history of sneaking into that train yard and playing, and had been caught/removed several times and warned not to come back. The parents still went on the news a few days later and blamed the railway, ended up suing, and won for a lot of money. We had an elderly man who passed under unclear circumstances, except his throat had swollen shut. What we learned was this man had previously had a stroke that affected his sensation to pain. One day he decided to make a baked potato, and ate it far sooner than he should have. The potato was so hot it caused severe burns to his mouth and throat, with the ensuing edema swelling his throat shut and causing him to suffocate. The resident I worked with on that case dubbed it death by hot potato. It's not uncommon to have people get shot in the heart, but found dead a block or so away with scrapes all over them. Unlike Hollywood, getting shot in the heart doesn't kill you instantly. As one can suspect, most people don't like getting shot at and instinctively try to run away. Essentially, these people die in mid-stride, when they finally bleed out and collapse wherever they end up. Not a cause of death, but probably my best story at parties. I used to work at a university medical center, and we would get research requests fairly often. One day, an ear, nose, and throat resident showed up in the morgue and needed help getting at the temporal bones in 6 frozen, decapitated human heads. If you ever donate your body to science, stuff like this can happen. To do this, we had to remove the brains and then use a bandsaw to cut the heads down the middle. Unfortunately, our bandsaw was on the fritz and shorted out in the middle of the 3rd head. Some poor maintenance guy had to come down and fix the thing with this dude's half-sectioned face in front of him. Good times. Story 2. This is actually pretty common. Edit. So there have been a couple of requests for explanations. Here's what I posted further down. Major edit. You aren't going to die from having a bowel movement. The following is a discussion about why people with bad hearts, limited cardiac output, and damaged vocal cords. Vasovagal syncope is totally boring from a medical perspective. I don't even treat it. If the normal person faints from having a bowel movement, their heart kicks back in like it should, and you keep on living, you aren't going to die. Yeah, awesome question. So I have been wondering a ton about it. I work with babies and children born with heart problems, and it's actually pretty common to see these little guys get into big trouble when they throw up or bear down to try and pass stool, especially if they aren't quite normal to begin with. As I'm sure you know, the phenomena of vagal-mediated syncope, common faint, is pretty well described. A quick synopsis of how I think of it is as follows. The heart maintains adequate blood flow to the brain through a carefully regulated system of arterial resistance, heart rate control, and indirectly how much blood the heart receives/squeezes out, preload. A faint happens when the heart does not provide adequate blood flow to the brain. The regulation on this needs to be pretty good, obviously, because when we stand up, the demands for output are different than laying down. Similarly, we need more output when we are exercising and so on. So, when we stand up, the bug will need more output and blood to brain need to balance, but it can mismatch. This can happen for a couple of reasons. 1. The fainter stands up too fast, and the brain can't tell the heart fast enough that it needs more output. So the fainter stands up, but the heart doesn't turn up the rate/squeeze, and so inadequate blood flow makes it to the brain. The heart catches up eventually, but not before the fainter hits the ground. 2. Same thing happens, but instead of too little we see too much response. The system in charge of regulating arterial tone over-responds, and the brain doesn't see enough blood again. Floor. 3. The system inappropriately slams on the brakes on the heart. The nerve that is in charge of backing off the heart is called the vagus nerve. It usually does a pretty good job, but it's networked into all our gut, as well as a litany of other things. If you stimulate this nerve elsewhere, it will incidentally slow down the heart. So increasing the pressure in your abdomen will similarly slow down your heart. It's not the only reason that bearing down is a problem, though. When you increase your intrathoracic chest pressure, you also drop the amount of blood returning to the heart. Why? Well, if you think about the blood going back to your heart as a pipe, squeezing the chest and abdomen is the same as pinching the length of it, so breathing out hard, or having a bowel movement, makes your heart get less blood. All right, vagal syncope 101 completed. The physiology behind dying when you have a bowel movement is interesting, because typically when you have an increase in vagal tone, nervous system that is incidentally activated by squeezing during defecation, your body responds by cranking up the catecholamines, e.g. epinephrine/adrenaline, and eventually, be it by junctional escape or ventricular escape, some part of the heart fires, the heart contracts and catecholamines are distributed and the person recovers. Except lots of times, the kids I take care of, and older people, or people under strong medication, have weak vocal cords. The vocal cords are pretty important for driving up the pressure in your abdomen and chest to expel a bowel movement. Don't believe me? Next time you need to pass stool, try actively exhaling when you bear down. Dollars to donuts, you'll experience some impressive lightheadedness. So with kids who have had major surgery or were affected by genetic conditions, or older people who have had a stroke or have Parkinson's or are on a boatload of meds or whatever, they aren't good at making tight seals with their vocal cords. So when they try to have a bowel movement, they have to squeeze much harder to get the stools out. This does two things. 1, it increases the vagal tone so the heart is wrongly told to pump less, and the heart gets a lot less blood. Story 3. Paramedic here. I once worked a day in a seaside community where there was a bad winter storm. Due to its location, it was quite bad compared to most places. I'm talking minus 30 degrees Celsius, 100+ kilometers per hour winds, extreme amount of ice in the ocean, and lots of snow. This day I was doing the dispatch and also responding to calls. I get a phone call that there was someone found frozen on the front step. We rush down there and find a 50-ish-year-old female sitting on her front step by her door, completely frozen solid. She lived in the last house on a road that was right next to the ocean. I remember how windy and cold it was. In healthcare, there is a saying that you aren't dead until you're warm and dead. But this lady was clearly frozen solid. It was hard to examine her on the step due to the high wind and snow. I remember her key was in the deadbolt, It was open, but the door wouldn't budge. I had to use all of my weight to get it to open, and when it did, a bunch of ice fell from the edges of the door. I pick her up to move her in, and her body doesn't flex at all. Holding her up, she was in the exact same position as she was on the step. Her daughter showed up at this point and explained that she was at the neighbor's the night before for dinner and left around 8 p.m. We got the call for her around 7:30 a.m. the next morning. While examining her, I found a bottle of nitro clenched in her fist. Her daughter mentioned she had angina and used it a lot. I was assuming she couldn't get the door open and started having chest pain and sat down. We were told the autopsy results, and it was confirmed she died of a heart attack. Story 4. I sometimes have to receive bodies late at night that the police bring in. The weirdest one I have had was a guy who was living in his ex-wife's garage without her knowledge. She never went in there, except for when a scrap metal merchant knocked on her door asking if she had anything for him. She suggested they try the garage, where they discovered a rank smell and a decomposing body wrapped in blankets. She was initially a suspect, but it turns out that he had been suffering from cancer and had died of cancer whilst wrapped in the sheets. We also had a little girl a couple of weeks ago who swallowed a battery from a remote control and died when the acid caused fatal internal injuries. Edit. I'll add another one. This guy was alive when he came in, though died later. He came into hospital with severe injuries, including the loss of his lower legs and a significant head wound. Turned out he was on his way home, drunk from the pub, and fell asleep on some train tracks whilst taking a shortcut. The train had caused his injuries. He died whilst in hospital, but he lived for a bit, which is amazing. Story 6. Oh man, as both a paramedic and a mortician, although never at the same time, I know I've got some good ones rattling around the old brain. Off the top of my head, here's one. Decomposing body is found in the basement of an abandoned building. All doors and windows are still intact and locked, so no idea how he got in, but it was fairly obvious why he didn't get out. Several large pieces of furniture apparently fell through the attic floor, onto him, then through the floor of the ground floor into the basement, crushing him. The odds of some guy being in the house in exactly the wrong place, at exactly the time the attic floor gave out, seems so infinitesimal as to be exceedingly improbable, and yet, the medical examiner found no other injuries than those consistent with being crushed by an antique bedroom set. And while not quite as weird, very first paramedic call was a doozy. We had a guy killed in a garbage truck rollover. He'd been one of the guys who rides on the back and empties the bins, part of a new 3-man truck crew. The driver told the guys to hold on tight, then accelerated on a rural straightaway to see what this thing can do, all with the 2 dudes holding onto their handles and the little steps that are only supposed to be used while creeping down the street emptying trash cans. Driver crests a hill and realizes that the road rather abruptly ends at a T-junction ahead and desperately tries to slow and turn the truck, but he's too late. The entire lorry flips onto its side, sending the guy on the now top side flying over into the woods. Miraculously, he lands safely and has only a 3-inch laceration on his arm. The other guy, though, his injuries were severe. Vehicle rollover deaths are fairly common, but the extra stupidity and having to dig through several feet of rancid garbage and have heavy rescue employ pneumatic expanders to even get to the victim made it stand out. Story 7. I was a police dispatcher at the time, so I didn't specifically see it, but I had to listen in on the conversation when 2 police officers found the following. You know those ladders on the side of buildings that drop down when someone uses them? The fire escapes? Well, a guy tried using one of them one night, but he fell off the side. The fall might not have killed him, as it was only a 2-story drop, but his coat got caught on the railing and he became trapped, ultimately strangling himself accidentally. Story 8. Not really weird, but something people don't think about. I was an autopsy tech and we had a patient who was obese and broke her ankle. Her doctor set her up with a walking cast and told her to walk. She decided she didn't want to, ignored doctor's orders, and just got around at work, librarian, on a computer chair by scooting around. One early morning she woke up not being able to breathe, keels over, and died. While we did the post, we flipped her and opened up her calves. There were several deep vein thromboses, DVTs. One had broken off and caused a massive pulmonary embolism, which killed her in her early 50s. Lesson: listen to your doctor and follow their orders. Don't think you're the exception. Story 9. I can talk about this one, actually. I was a morgue intern in college. There weren't really many weird causes of death. 80% of it is just heart disease in its various forms, then just failure of other organs. Then you have the occasional physical accident. The very, very rare homicide. The weird things were usually the situations that came up. My personal favorite example would have to be this one. Imagine, if you will, a 400-pound woman driving alone on the highway. For reasons unknown, she drives off of the road into a ditch. The car flips upside down. She's hanging by her seatbelt. The emergency medical technicians, EMTs, arrive. She's barely conscious. They cut her seatbelt. She comes down. She goes out. She never comes back up. So anyway, the logistics of managing 400 pounds of dead weight are challenging, to say the least. It takes 4 of us to get anything done. The doctor is doing the usual external examination and needs to see the backside. 2 people get on one side to pull, and someone else and I get on the other side to push. And as I push against the rolls of fat, I slowly lift it up like a treasure chest in The Legend of Zelda, and what do I find? 4 dimes, hidden in the rolls of her back fat. I think the weird thing about this is that she was wearing a shirt when she died, which means those dimes were already there. Like, did she keep them there on purpose? Would she be driving with someone and say, "Hey Jim, can you get the change for the toll? Second shelf, far right." And I have to imagine that they had to return the money to her relatives along with everything else. Here's her clothes, here's her purse, here's 40 cents. Don't ask. Story 10. Former biological anthropologist. As an undergrad, I worked for a forensic anthropologist. This is the weirdest case she had that I got to see for myself. It was from the 1920s. My boss had inherited a coroner's collection of odd/interesting bones he collected during his tenure in a major city. Back then, coroners could just take whatever they wanted from bodies without telling the families. If the individual was poor, indigent, an immigrant, or a minority, they really helped themselves, sometimes taking the whole body. This coroner took a lot of stuff, even rearticulating some of the pieces, reconstructing how they looked when they were attached to the rest of the person. Several of the pieces were designated what she called death by testosterone poisoning. They did not literally die of testosterone poisoning, but they all died because of risky, foolish actions. Think Jackass, only with no monetary payout. The weirdest one was, from early last century, a white male in his 40s who died from sepsis, from multiple arm fractures that he got in an arm wrestling contest. Even after cracking his humerus, upper arm bone a bit, he couldn't bear losing, so he wrapped it up with a splint, had someone hold the fracture, and went for best 2 out of 3, whereupon he snapped the humerus completely and broke his radius and ulna when he slammed his arm down on the edge of the table. He sustained a compound fracture, and since he did not seek medical care, the wound became gangrenous and the infection entered his bloodstream. He died of septicemia a few weeks later. Looking at the bone, I could see all of the fractures, as well as where the infection had attacked the periosteum and the bone itself, with no sign of healing. Too long. Didn't read. Risky arm wrestling contest results in multiple arm fractures, gangrene, and death from septicemia. Labeled jokingly as death by testosterone poisoning by the owner of the anatomical collection. Story 11. Weirdest case was a guy who committed suicide. Wasn't hard to figure out, but the weird part was that he and his friends were having some sort of suicide race, like who could end their life first. We realized this individual, 21 years old I believe, had overdosed on a mix of substances and alcohol. That was his third attempt that week. We saw that our pedestrian, who had been hit by a train a week before, was one of the friends in this pact. Don't commit suicide by train. The scene was difficult, and we had to walk like a half-mile of tracks to recover all the remains. Plus, you're forcing the conductor to deal with it. But the thing that made me mad was that this guy knew he was trying to end his life, yet he wore 3 pairs of pants, and I was in charge of undressing the body. We couldn't cut the clothes off in case the family wanted them. Undressing a body that's already in rigor is hard. He had a pair of jeans, then a pair of Superman pajama pants. Underneath those, a pair of Charlie Brown Christmas boxers. In February, I swear he did it just to annoy a morgue worker, which happened to be me. Another weird one was a guy who committed vehicular suicide by slamming into the Jersey wall on the highway. Car stopped. His body stopped. His heart was dislodged from its position. Then the car caught fire, so we had a very burned body that came in. Story 12. My mom worked at the county morgue part-time to help make extra money when I was 5. It was awful. On my 5th Christmas, I had just gotten my first big boy 2-wheel bike with no training wheels. My mom came home, scolded me, and took the bike away. When I got older, she told me that on that same night, a boy my age, who resembled me, had received his first big bike and tragically passed away. The worst story she ever told me was this. A lady had terminal cancer and was in terrible pain. This was the 80s, and she had no insurance. She had attempted to end her life, resulting in severe injuries. By the time the body was brought to the county morgue for examination, decomposition had progressed rapidly due to the previous injuries, and the staff had to carefully manage the body for examination. My mom said it was the most disturbing thing she had ever witnessed, and decided to quit that week. Story 13. I was on the verge of working at the county morgue last summer. The morgue is right beside the county prison, so it processes deceased inmates for the county. During my interview, they gave me a tour and let me sit in while they did an autopsy. The deceased was an inmate in maximum security who had died in his cell, and the cause was initially unknown. As they proceeded with the autopsy, they noticed a lot of internal bleeding near his intestines. Upon further inspection, the medical examiner discovered an object in his rectum, which had caused severe internal injuries. The bleeding led to his death. Story 14. Autopsy tech/death investigator. A morbidly obese man had died in a budget motel room with the heat cranked up and wasn't found for several days. By the time he arrived at the morgue, he was severely bloated from decomposition, with discoloration and skin slippage. During the initial Y incision, the escaping gas caused a release of internal fluids. The room filled with an intense odor, the strongest I've ever encountered. Despite the shock, we all couldn't help but laugh at the surreal situation. The floor became very slippery, creating a chaotic scene. Too long. Didn't read. Autopsy on a severely decomposed, morbidly obese man. Gas and fluids caused unexpected mess and chaos in the morgue. Story 15. My father was a paramedic, and he shared a story of the most extreme case of this happening. A man had been fatally shot, but the paramedics still had to officially check for signs of life. He was still freshly dead, like less than half an hour, and when they pressed the cold stethoscope to his chest to listen for a pulse, his muscles contracted as a reflex, and his body just sat right up and make a breathing noise as the air was pushed out of his lungs. Everyone there just freaked out before realizing what had happened. If it's even remotely true, it's pretty hilarious. Story 16. I'm a nurse now, but I was an autopsy tech before I got into nursing school. This one case was a 400-pound man who died of a strong substance overdose. Standard operating procedure for the medical examiner is to examine the lividity. When you dye your blood pools and discoloration your skin a deep red/purple. It's an indicator for time of death and position of body. So I call the orderly to help hold the guy over, and once we were ready, I positioned myself so that I could push his shoulders and hips to help him roll. We give the heave-o and get the body on its side, at which time the fart that had been fermenting in the guy's colon for a week unleashed itself a mere 6 inches from my nose. It was the most putrid, bombastic, and permeating fart I've ever been a part of. It had to have lasted a minute at least, and the smell could gag a maggot. I couldn't let the body drop since the medical examiner was doing his thing, but the orderly is laughing a lot at me and lets go. I'm now holding 400 pounds of dead weight as it expels its wrench-bending air blast at me. How I didn't puke is nothing short of a miracle. Too long, didn't read. Holding a body on its side, it unleashed a fart that could knock a buzzard off a messy wagon directly at my nose. Story 17. A lady from our village was talking to my pop about her job as a mortician. She told several stories of the deceased moving and such after being brought to their facilities. Some would raise their arms, some would arch their backs, some would produce sounds from their vocal cords like they were humming, and some would open their eyes and have extreme facial expressions. One story I will never forget was when she was retelling her story about retrieving a body at the old folks' facility. They called, said an elderly woman had died during her sleep, and to please come get the body. Now this facility was a bit overcrowded, and the deceased had shared a room with another tenant. The mortician and her assistant roll their gurney up next to the lady, stretched out stiff on the bed closest to the door, trying not to disturb the other elderly woman on the adjacent bed that was restless in her bed and couldn't sleep. It was 3 a.m. in the morning. They were trying to be respectful, and hell, the mortician even made a mental note that she likely wouldn't be able to sit still with a dead occupant laying in the room with her either at that hour of the night. Edit. To clarify, the other lady appeared to be constantly readjusting her sleeping position. The mortician and her assistant grab the stiffy closest to the door and try to bring her over to the gurney when she starts yelling and hollering about some random people trying to kidnap her in her sleep. Then it dawned on the mortician. They were taking the wrong elderly woman from the room. The body does some strange things after it passes. Story 18. Detective, who has gone to a number of autopsies. 1. A guy had a part of his skull removed to relieve pressure to the skull from a head injury. They placed the circular piece of skull back and attached it with a few screws, and over time it would fuse. A year later, the guy tripped in his study and hit that exact spot on the edge of a chair, causing the piece of skull to injure his brain. 2. Worker on construction site slipped and was impaled on rebar framing on a building. Died, while firefighters were cutting the bar below him to extract him. 3. A woman belonging to a religious cult was studying abroad and got engaged. On returning home, her parents didn't approve of her partner. She got sicker and sicker. While in hospital, her parents went to her workplace and binned her belongings and informed them she won't be back. Told fiancé he's not welcome at the hospital, and 2 weeks later she died. Parents slowly poisoned her to death, only becoming suspicious when toxicology came back after death. Story 19. I'm a paramedic. One of the cases that sticks out in my mind. We got called by a man to do a wellness check on his sister. He lived on the lower floor of a house, and she on the upper. He was wheelchair-bound, and she was his caretaker. She hadn't come downstairs that morning, and he was worried because he heard a thud the night before. He didn't think anything of it until she didn't show up in the morning. So we go up the stairs. We noticed signs of a disturbance leading to the bathroom, where the scene was alarming. We went looking for her and found her on the floor, between the bed and the wall, telephone next to her. Clearly she was trying to call for help. She was pale. Usually, a deceased person will be blue or purple and mottled, but she had lost a significant amount of blood. I'm guessing it was ruptured esophageal varices, but it was never confirmed. Story 20. Oh boy, my time to shine. I worked as a forensic technician / medical examiner's assistant for roughly 2 years. We were cross-trained in both autopsy and decedent removal from death scenes. I wouldn't particularly say anything was creepy per se, but some things were definitely gross and morbid. Going down to the satellite office, there's one headquarters HQ office in the state capital and a few smaller satellite offices throughout the state. In the south, that was in the woods at 3 a.m. in the middle of a storm, could certainly be considered creepy. However, I'll do my best to synopsize some of the creepiest things I've encountered, in no particular order. The man who used woman's underwear as a toilet. 2 brothers lived in a would-be condemned house, both of whom had severe intellectual disabilities. This was the most repulsive living situation I have ever personally seen. Black mold everywhere, the ceiling caving in, everything covered in crumbling drywall and water damage. They had no running water. The only clean items were 2 pallets of baked beans and Coca-Cola. The only food they ate were beans, and the only drink was Coke. We got upstairs into the deceased brother's room to find him lodged between the bed and the wall, which is not uncommon for someone who dies suddenly in their bed. The floors were very messy, with dirty substances scattered around, and there were many unusable old guns in the house. The man whose face was scavenged by animals. A man died while riding his bike through a field. Overnight, his face had been severely scavenged by a wild animal. It was a very disturbing sight. A small swarm of yellow jackets had also infested the area. We had to take precautions before opening the body bag. Fatal fall from a bridge. A man jumped from a bridge after tethering a length of high-tension wire to it, and his neck as a noose. He suffered a fatal fall. That was the first and only time I saw such an incident on the job. Woman died during pregnancy. A woman around 8 months pregnant died. The autopsy was remarkable. The medical examiner was able to remove the pregnancy sac carefully, allowing for observation. Extremely sad and heartbreaking, but contextually interesting. I might post some more later. Alternatively, feel free to peruse through my post history, as I've told a few stories in the past as well in a similar thread. Story 21. I was a volunteer at a hospital who worked in storage. It was right next to the morgue, but I was also one of the restockers for it too. Weirdest 3 things I've seen were: a man suffered fatal crushing injuries from a box flattener, and his remains were brought in. The day with overflow. About 20 people passed away in less than a day at the small hospital. It has 9 drawers. Some people were in the non-refrigerated part with ice packs on them. Then they had 3 people in the employee-only hallway. They were trying to get a funeral place to come hold them. A man tried to take the body of a woman. He was her ex, and decided it was his right to bury her in his yard instead of her husband of a year. He kicked in the door when the hall was clear, put her in a wheelchair, then tried to sneak her out of the store loading dock. He was stopped only because, "Patients are not allowed to exit through these doors, sir," and had to leave through the front lobby where he was recognized. Extra, but I wasn't there for it. A very large woman passed away and was too big for their fridge, so they needed special arrangements to handle her. She also had her computed axial tomography (CT) scan done at a different facility. Story 22. Just sharing some stories I saved. I read them 2 years ago, and they just stuck in my head. A person who was severely anorexic was examined. The long-term starvation had caused all of their organs to atrophy and fail. The emaciation was extreme, affecting their entire body, from their bones to their internal organs. The cause of death was liver failure, with aspiration pneumonia as a contributing factor. The effects of the eating disorder were profound, leaving the body in a state of advanced deterioration. Story 23. I have found illegal substances in the digestive tract many times. The weirdest things I have found included probably $100 worth of batteries in the stomach, a bag of popsicles in someone's underwear, and once a man had an object lodged inside his body. We also get decomposed bodies with insect activity, which is sometimes visible. Story 24. Masters in Forensic Pathology here. You'd be surprised to know the number of people that have life-threatening issues that never went diagnosed, and that they didn't die from. Seen an older guy who died of pneumonia in hospital. On autopsy, the guy had both an enlarged heart and a couple of medium-sized aneurysms in the brain. Another male in his 70s apparently came into the emergency room, ER, and had chest pain, then died shortly after. Dies of a heart attack but also had cancer. In less natural circumstances, though, saw a guy who had been shot in the head a couple of times, 3 definite entries, and a severe head wound, but police only found 1 bullet. Couldn't find the other bullet in his head at all, assumed the police missed it, went on as normal with the autopsy, until we got to the chest cavity. The other bullet was just chillin' beside his lung. Turns out it entered the skull, hit the inside, ricocheted down his neck, and into the chest. That was pretty wild. Story 25. Not exactly an autopsy per se, but it was a patient found unresponsive, with cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, in progress by Emergency Medical Services, EMS. The man was clearly homeless, based on his appearance and smell. He reportedly had not been seen for several days by his friends, and was eventually found behind a fast food restaurant dumpster. We were briefly able to get a pulse back, and when the nurse cut his pants off to place a catheter, we saw the cause. He had fashioned a tight ring from a plastic bottle and placed it on his body. It cut off circulation, causing severe tissue damage. I did a bedside ultrasound and found his abdomen full of free fluid, which is bad. Most likely his bladder had ruptured from the obstruction. His lab suggested he was in septic shock and full-blown renal failure as well. He did not survive much longer than that. Edit. I remembered another one. In my final year of training, we had a cadaver lab to practice advanced airway management techniques, e.g., difficult intubation, cricothyroidotomy, etc. While I was helping an intern do a basic intubation, she commented the tube wouldn't pass. I think there is some kind of obstruction in the airway. I took a look, asked for some forceps, and pulled a foreign object out of the airway. Cause of death identified. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. If you feel unsafe with your thoughts, please seek professional help.